Good afternoon, class. My name is Kurt Williams, and I'm going to be sharing about my project, which is Samsung. They need a marketing makeover because they're losing profits to Apple, and we're going to go through how to win them back. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why they're losing profits. So, Samsung sells about a quarter of all mobile phones in the world. And if you take out China, who does have mostly Android phones, Samsung sells a lot more, at least just in the United States. So, their operating system is Android. They own or run about 86% of all phones in the world. Compare that to Apple. Apple has just 13% of the mobile phones in the world. So you can see how if Samsung is losing all this profit, we got to figure out why. And those statistics are from Parik back in 2016. And Apple made twice as much profit in 2016. That's from Dunn. And Galaxy Note 7, when those batteries started exploding, the day that they were recalled, Samsung lost $18 billion in value in stock share. So, and that was from Kripal in 2016. Now, this is the profile of the profits. You can see that Samsung, ever since 2013, their profits have been going down. They haven't been making more money. They've been steadily declining. They lost $30 billion in revenue from 2013 to 2014, where Apple has been climbing. They're up at $158 billion in 2016, almost twice as much as Samsung in 2016, and that's startling for someone who is trying to make profit, and especially when they're selling, more than a third of phones in the United States. So our secondary research wanted to focus on demographics. Who is buying iPhones? Who is buying Samsung? And our primary research wanted to focus on why. Why are people buying iPhones if they're so expensive? And why not buy Samsung if they do, sort of the same thing? So our results showed us that iPhone users are more educated and thus have higher income. 83.4% of people want to stay with Apple versus only 64.2% want to stay with Samsung. So they're much more loyal. Those statistics are from Elmer DeWitt. And about staying with Apple versus staying in Samsung, that's from Epstein, 2015. Now, our recommendations talk about consolidating resources. Some of the problems that we think Samsung has. Samsung in 2016 offered 30 phones. iPhone only offered 3. So they had 10 times as many phones. And in 2015, they had 56 phones offered. So if they cut down on those resources going to other phones, they'll stop cannibalizing themselves. They'll be able to focus on a few different phones a year, and they'll be able to incorporate better technology. But again, we'll get to all that. And the marketing plan is to make iPhone seem elitist, and that is something that we'll get to also. But it's going to be a very effective tool. It's risky but effective. In our eyes. So this is one thing that Samsung is dealing with. You see the chart of Apple. 83.4% want to stay, only 4% want to move over to Samsung versus almost double Samsung, almost 2.5 times as many people want to move from Samsung to Apple, and 26% aren't really sure. That's a quarter of people on Samsung. They don't know if they want to move to Apple, go to a different brand. They're not really sure, but it's Apple's people are so much more loyal. So we see here the income graph on top, the education graph on bottom. So Samsung, their biggest portion of their line of their bar graph is 25,000 to 50,000 per year, and Apple's, on the other hand, they're almost 75,000 to 150,000 and 50,000 to 75,000. They're almost identical, but you can see that the graph skews towards Samsung being lower income, and as you can imagine, that correlates very much to education level. So Apple, you look at the master's degree on the end. There are almost twice, maybe 3 times as many people with master's degrees have an Apple phone versus Samsung. And the biggest slice for Samsung is only people with some college, where the biggest bar for the bar graph is college degree for Apple. And these graphs are from Elmer DeWitt, once again. Now, this is an interesting map. It shows Samsung in green, Android in green dots, and red dots are iPhone. These are tweets from 2 different areas. These are right next to each other. What you don't see on this map is that the red in New York City under that is actually a lot of Android devices, but they're covered up. This map doesn't do a very good job of showing both at the same time. But what we don't need to see that, because we understand that there are Androids, and Androids are much more ubiquitous, as we talked about earlier. But and there are a lot of iPhones in New York City too. But you look over in New York, there's almost no iPhones in the middle area. iPhones almost non-existent because Newark is a much more poor area of that area of the New York metro area. Now this map is from Edward in 2014. Now we want to go into why people make these choices. One of the reasons is that there's a lot more apps available in iPhone. Now iPhones, the reason that developers want to move towards the iPhone platform is because the iOS, the operating system, is a closed source, and the users, as we saw, they earn more income, but they're also more willing to pay for these apps, and they make more in-app purchases. So if you see the graph on the right here, Apple earned about $100 million in the first quarter of 2015, whereas Google Play, they had almost maybe 60,000, maybe $55 million. But if you look on the left, there were much more downloads, almost 2/3 more downloads for Google Play. So there's a lot more income to be had by these developers by making closed source proprietary apps and coding, but they also get more money too because people are more willing to pay for it. iPhone users are more socially aware, and what that means is they're more aware of their social status. They're more fixated on social norms, and hey, I need this car and I need to live in this area. They're much more aware of that, and to go with that, they're seen as more elitist and more obnoxious. When you get down there, there's a study done by Shaw, and she says that people talking about Android users, they're more humble, they're more honest, but iPhone users, the adjectives to describe them are elitist and obnoxious. And the developer information above was from Heisler in 2015. Now this quote is from Mills. He took this quote from Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple, when he's talking to a price-sensitive group of Chinese businessmen. Said Apple's pricing is high in the extreme. It's a safe bet for people, and when you love Apple, you're willing to pay for it. But Apple is falling behind in terms of features at all. It is not falling behind. You can't be number one in everything when you make a huge volume, tens of millions of product. So another reason that people want it is it's exclusive, and that's another reason people want to have these social things. Their social statuses. iPhones are exclusive, and if they're number one in all these technologies, they can't sell it for a cheap price, and they can't create tens of millions of the product. So what our recommendations come to is consolidating resources. Again, that's talking about, instead of making 30 phones, make a most of 5, and that'll consolidate uh, on materials, that'll consolidate on staff, that'll consolidate on technology, and more better technology, more brain power can go into these 5 phones instead of being spread across 30, and then they cannibalize each other. And by the way, saving on the materials, technology, all those things can save money, and at the same time, we believe that we should raise prices on Samsung phones. You can still raise prices above that of the iPhone. You're making the phones for less because we consolidated resources, but still raise prices. So you're gonna on both ends, you're gonna save money and raise prices. You're gonna cut that revenue gap really quickly. And we want to focus on distinguishing themselves from iPhone because there have been a lot of lawsuits of patent laws broken by Samsung. So you have to be able to create your own technology, go distance yourself from the iPhone, make it look like it's not a copycat company. And the last thing, again, it's very risky, but it's also a good choice, and it'll pay off if it works well. Market the iPhone as an elitist choice and Samsung as the layperson choice. So an example of this is because if you're going to look at people on Twitter, for instance, this is when Instagram became an Android app. It was only exclusive to iPhone, and then it came out to Android. And you see these quotes here. People are so critical because they see Android users as ghetto people, the people of Walmart, and it's just you can see that these people don't take Android users seriously. They see them as poor or weak or not smart, and so it's something that Android can really sink its teeth into and use images like this in their marketing and their social media campaigns and say, hey, look, you have a phone. If you don't need a phone with all the gizmos and gadgets, you can buy a cheaper phone and it'll do what you need, and it'll get the job done. So thank you guys very much for listening to my presentation, and please have a good rest of your MBA program.